and newly an adjunct professor at Western Sydney University, which I'm very proud of. Look, we've got 35 minutes, and it's a bit of a canter, I think, as well. But we've got a very talented panel, a very talented audience, and me. And I'm going to start with a proposition that EDs and MEDs, as they begin to be called, internationally, are big drivers of urban change. They employ loads of people. They spend lots of money in places. They create skills. We have to plan for them properly. It's a big agenda for change. There's real momentum behind this kind of a sector. And I think inevitably start, Barney, where we are in your house, and say something about, you're an extraordinary civic institution in Sydney now, I think, but actually you're a major player in the process of urban transformation. You've just opened your new 1PSQ. It's an extraordinary thing. Why did you do that, and what are the outcomes that you're getting from that investment?
Thanks, thanks, Tim. It's great to be here at the Out There Summit. 1PSQ, I think, is one of the boldest steps we've made as a university, let alone, I think, considering infrastructure development from any Australian university, not simply because of the move into the heart of Parramatta, but the financial model that underpinned it, which I think is a really important part of this. There's a lot of discussion going on in higher education at the moment, very relevant to this conversation about the transformative power of health and education in our cities, is the infrastructure financing models we need to consider to make these changes possible. Universities in Australia don't have access to the levels of Commonwealth funding for infrastructure development that we once had, so we've got to look for new models of funding the very extraordinary facilities that we need in fast-growing regions of Australia. So 1PSQ, I think, was a bold move by us. It's 26,000 square metres. It'll accommodate 10,000 students. It has about 7,000 students at the moment, and we've sublet a number of floors. One of the things we learned very early on in this development is how attractive it is to put a major campus facility in the heart of a growing urban region like Parramatta. It has attracted enormous interest, and I'm sure if we had more floors available we would have let them. But one of the great advantages that we see is not simply the revitalisation that we're contributing to in Parramatta and being part of the Parramatta City Council's Parramatta Square development, and to see that come to fruition rapidly over the next 5 years, and I think we've had a hand in catalysing that development and to bringing forward, I think, some of the opportunities in Parramatta Square. But it is enabling us to work so closely with the business community of Parramatta and of Western Sydney. And for those in this room, people in this room might have already had a chance to visit 1PSQ, but if you go to level 9, we've got a conference venue there that's like no other in Parramatta and is providing us with a unique opportunity to bring the business community close to the university, which is very important to us, but importantly to connect our students with the business community. So you talk about student outcomes, which we're very driven by in this sense. This is a great opportunity for our business students to be closer to the business community of the West. And one other point I think about drivers for us with 1PSQ, like all Australian universities, we're an international institution. So one of the important drivers for us is our international outreach and to attract international students in increasing numbers inbound to Western Sydney. And I'll leave you with just the data. International education is worth $6 billion a year to Sydney. 70,000 international students are here each year and growing. We have about 32% market share in Australia. 40,000 of those international students live in Western Sydney. So from a purely economic perspective, not to mention the cultural and social dimensions, attracting more international students inbound is a hugely important initiative, and we think 1PSQ will drive that.
Before I go to Sam to talk about health infrastructure, I want to come back on one thing to really spell out something. For those Sydney-siders who never get to see changing Parramatta, they need to get out more. And when they see 1PSQ, they'll just realise there's a shift. It sort of symbolises the shift that's going on in Western Sydney. But also itself, as you were saying, is bringing knowledge jobs, those very knowledge jobs, and not just university students, but actually companies that want to be close to those university students. And what it is doing also is turning it into a reality, that concept we're seeing internationally of the innovation district, which is mixed use, which is quite town centre-ish in its feel, and attracts investors as well as students. And I think you're on the wave of a real cusp of physical, it's got a physical transformation combined with, it's like urbanism and innovation going together, I think.
And I think this will be replicated in Western Sydney. I'm sure Lindy will talk about Campbelltown and the exciting things that are being planned there. We'll be opening an 11,000 square metre campus in the heart of Liverpool in January next year.
Yeah.
And as Luke mentioned earlier, we have the University of Wollongong as a competitor and partner institution already in Liverpool. So you will see that change start to generate the same impact in Liverpool.
So universities are a source of urban transformation of Western Sydney.
Absolutely.
And town centre renewal, actually. Sam, you've got a massive infrastructure programme, the biggest in the universe, happening in Sydney. It's all under control, completely under control. What's going on out there? What are you in charge of? What scares you most? This massive programme that you've got underway, but also what do you think the opportunities are that you're seeing kind of emerge in Western Sydney?
Look, just the easy question to start with, clearly there, Tim. Look, we're looking after a program that's about $5.5 billion now, about 61 projects across the state. And so there's a regionality to our projects. About 44% of our projects are in the regions. Within Western Sydney, we're looking after three major redevelopments and some small things as well. Obviously, Westmead Blacktown and Nepean, which are in of themselves over $2.1 billion worth of investment. So happily, we're not facing Barney's challenge in terms of the infrastructure funding challenge. The challenge is actually how we actually don't create the monoliths and just a singular set of infrastructure. And so it's about how we create that spend and turn it into a productivity dividend that is enduring. And particularly when we look at Westmead, we've talked a lot now at Westmead about its economic impact. And the fact that today at Westmead there's about 13,000 jobs, and we've set ourselves a target to get that to 55,000 jobs. The only way you're going to do that is if you deliver an outstanding precinct, and if you deliver outstanding and great affordable living outcomes. And that's why we've been working so closely with the Greater Sydney Commission, because just building great new fantastic hospitals, and my team and the district's team are here today and they're doing an awesome job. But if we don't get the affordable living, the affordable housing, the great cafes, the institutions that actually support great living, we won't attract the talent to actually provide those services. And I know Amanda was talking about that, Amanda Larkham was talking about that earlier. In southwest Sydney, we face that challenge wherever we're going, is actually creating great places for people to come and actually work and live. These are, most of our facilities, people don't understand this, most of our facilities have the same number of people visit them or work in them as most regional centres. If you're a real estate developer or a retail developer like Westfield, we're getting greater visitation in some of our facilities than they do. And so you actually begin to think about it in that way. It's a very different opportunity.
So you're beginning to think of hospitals as, in the sense we heard of universities, as drivers of transformation of local jobs and benefits, but you're also, I think, trying to break down some of the government silos to make sure that there are better places, that these are just not isolated developments. How's that going?
Oh, look, I think that's been one of the things. Sarah's laughing next to me here. I think we've got a great story to tell now emerging at Westmead in terms of the integration of the light rail. You would have seen the discussion around light rail. The stops are at Westmead.
Yeah.
That sounds radical, and you sort of said, well, that's pretty obvious to put light rail at the front door of both the adult and the kids' hospital. That integration doesn't happen by accident. It's taken a lot of work from my team, and they've done an outstanding job of engaging thoroughly. And I think there's been a willingness across government to actually understand and listen, getting transport in the right location so that we actually reduce the car dependence. I mean, we're building a net additional 1,400 odd car parks at Westmead, and we've actually had to build 2,500 because we're knocking down about 1,000 car spaces. But actually one of the real challenges we have at Westmead is a very significant proportion of the car trips to Westmead every day are single drivers that are driving from the Hills District. Yeah. So the public transit doesn't actually necessarily support people coming to work. But actually, how about we think about it differently? How about we actually let them walk to work if we build great quality, affordable accommodation right nearby? So not only do we not have to build a car park, we actually reduce the complexity and the congestion on the roads because they're not on the road at all. Yeah. And actually we give great public transit that actually people want to move around. And in fact, if Danny's still here, Danny O'Connor, who's the Chief Executive there, talks a lot about the changing demographic, and we talk about a lot more of the younger demographic coming in, particularly the clinician demographic and the nurse demographic. They don't want to own a car. They want to live somewhere great, walk to work, enjoy a great lifestyle. And that makes our life much more complex than just building great clinical spaces.
Sam, I long ago decided you were a very good thing. And what you've just said is really important in terms of not just the role that hospitals play, but the way in which we can connect them better to their surrounding communities. And we're doing a bit of work. We've got an event at the end of May with Liverpool Council and the South West Area Health Authority around urban design and health. And it's the walkability agenda in Western Sydney and promoting it is such a critical agenda. And just the last thing, I don't want to set off a bout of light rail envy, but we haven't got one in the Northern Beaches Hospital in my area, but we have got one going to Westmead. So we're all going to move to Westmead. It's a far better place. Anyway, so can I move to Lindy? Now you've got a fantastic growth going on in your corridor, and like I think that somebody said it's like building a city like Canberra, it's sort of there. We need the schools, we need the health facilities, we need the education facilities. It's a big agenda for you. And I'm a big believer that strong local government like you run is pretty much at the heart of trying to make all these things work for their communities. How do you see the importance of this agenda?
Yeah, look, I think you can't understate health and education in terms of its contribution to the expansion of the investment and employment opportunities for Campbelltown. Campbelltown has amazing opportunities, both social and economic, and we are very, very blessed in the sense that we have existing natural attributes that are authentic in the terms of we are flanked within our CBD with a wonderful university campus, a TAFE campus, side by side. Combine that with a hospital, a wonderful school of medicine, an almost complete clinical school, research institutes knocking on our door. Really, it's all there. The foundation is there. What Amanda said earlier this morning in terms of them being one of our largest employers, absolutely, and over a wide range of jobs. The other thing about Campbelltown is that we have an existing manufacturing industries that are already working in that precision industry in medical prosthesis and so forth. So there's great opportunity there. So with all of that in tail, we have run ahead of ourselves, I guess, and we have engaged Deitz, and we're working very closely. We're very fortunate to have Ben Artup and his team. And we've been holding a series of workshops and consultations with all the key stakeholders. And that goal for that is to develop the vision and the strategies to bring the stakeholders around the table in the decision making. I think none of this is possible unless you work collaboratively.
Yep.
No one institution can do it on their own. If you base it on the philosophy of the Greater Sydney Commission, it's a regional approach. It's about complementing each other. It's not competing with Liverpool or Penrith. It's actually complementing their strengths and working together as a broad region. Southwestern Sydney alone is enormous. Yeah. There is no competition. Yeah. The population is there to service what is needed to be serviced. What our responsibility is in our local government area is to think beyond our local government area, to think of the needs of the region, and to ensure that our community gets that social equity in terms of opportunities for employment and fantastic education opportunities. So I think it's critical, but it's very exciting for us.
Because I think the people around the table will be very excited to hear that they knew that you would be that kind of leader, because it's so important. The potential is enormous, but the collaborative requirements of that, the 2 + 2 = 5 elements, local government plays a very big part in helping to hold the tent together, but you've got very great civic-minded institutions that want to work with you. And I think there was the cliche of urban renewal, but it is true, is that cities collaborate to compete. And the best collaborative kind of cities, they do better than anybody else. We've got great opportunities. We've got graduates coming. We've got all the infrastructure that we kind of want come. We've got the knowledge jobs beginning to come. We can create the environment which they will all come. But somebody has to have some kind of passionate, responsibility for the area. And I think that's local government.
Tim, could I just add one thing? I mean, the example of Campbelltown and the University TAFE and the hospital is a good example, I think. Different level of infrastructure at the moment to a Westmead or in some sense a Parramatta. But I think it's so critical, and Lindy and I have been talking about this, about how closely we work together and coordinate. And I think it's not just coordination between the institutions like the university and the council, but it's also the state government, local government obviously, and federal government. Otherwise, I think we can work at cross purposes. And I think it's very important that we understand the council's plans for the future of the city of Campbelltown and how we relate to that as a university, because we can deliver great value if we think out over that 5 to 10 year horizon. And I think that's the opportunity. If we don't coordinate, then we run a real risk.
What's very exciting for me is that it's not just talking about the theory of collaboration, but we're actually doing it around the table, and the state government is creating some interesting institutions which are going to help collaboration. So I'm going to go to Sarah, I think, now, and then I'm going to ask Michael about the skills agenda. Okay. So Sarah, it's a revolutionary development. You've heard it commended today from Luke Foley with bipartisan support. Wanted to go further. It's all about land use and transport integration. It's about collaborative planning. The critique from the communities was always, it's all very well growing places, lots of houses, but where is the schools, where the education, where's the health facilities? Your job is to try and bring a lot of this together. It's a great job. You're a great person to do it. How's it going? And what do you think of this agenda?
Thanks, Tim, and congratulations to you too on your new role. Look, certainly coming into the role and as a commission, we've long pondered how we can add value to the various different organisations on the panel, and unfortunately we can't build health and education facilities ourselves, but there are some really basic things that we think we can help different organisations and add value through the process. And the first one is quite simply better communicating and understanding and working with people to understand where that growth is happening. And I call it town planning, but it's something we perhaps haven't done very clearly and very succinctly with other government agencies and with local councils and with stakeholders. So that's something we're aiming to do better. My one thing I wanted to do at the Commission was to get on one map all of the places where housing is being investigated and activity and development is happening, and I've just recently done that, and it tells a really important story. It's a basic story, but a really critical one. And the second one was to put all of the new bits of infrastructure and investment in education and health on a map to better understand where that alignment is. So the first thing we wanted to do was at least get the information, share the information, and start from a common platform with everyone. The second thing, which many of my colleagues here have already referenced many times, is about collaboration, and we go back to our mantra of coordination and collaboration. And you can't undersell the value of just putting pieces together. If you work with me, I quite often like to lock people in a room and just make stuff happen, or pick up the phone. And I bloody hate writing reports and emails and those sorts of things. Let's just get together and work through the issues. And that's certainly something we've had a philosophy on, but not as blunt as that. We also have a really critical component of our architecture of having health and education sitting on our infrastructure delivery committee. The other thing I want to flag that we were very cognisant of and really keen to do in our strategic plans is to recognise the incredible value of health and education precincts, and we call them super precincts, for all of the reasons that have been referenced here about the incredible employment generation, one of our biggest growth sectors in terms of jobs, the incredible spin-off effects from it, but of course the importance it has to our livability and sustainability as a city. So we recognise their value, but very much to Sam's point, all of the infrastructure they need to support them, the houses, the access via walking or via transport or other means. Who knows what those other means will be in 5 or 10 years. We're also looking at that. And the last thing we thought we could add value through is just being a bit radical with ideas, what's innovative, new ways of doing things. And what is such a seemingly obvious response about sharing spaces has really resonated well with people, and about breaking down those barriers to more effectively use our land and to more effectively realise the opportunities, as Luke Foley was referring to capitalise on existing government assets or to share spaces. And I think we're at the tip of the iceberg on things that we can do there. So there's a couple of things we're working through, a bit more to do.
A quickie on part of the challenge ahead is to commission the right infrastructure to meet the population challenge, and you've done your district plans recently.
Yep.
So can we expect to see more integrated infrastructure provision as a result of this?
Absolutely. Look, this year, so last year was critical for us to prepare draft district plans. We've received submissions loud and clear. People are really, really keen to see more concentration, more investment in infrastructure, which creates a challenge for the Commission. We don't have the funds and we don't have the legislation to go and require contributions and those sorts of things. But what we can do is bring people around the table to make it happen. And as I said, just my one legacy will be, providing with community and industry some basic plans that show what's happening in our city all on one page. And I just think that's absolutely critical.
Very revolutionary thing.
I'm really excited about it. I call it town planning, and I just think it's a really good idea that we start with the basics.
I'm all for you having a legacy, just don't go yet. Right, so. Now, Michael, you've got an exciting newish kind of job in a very important role in a changing world of skills sort of provision. You know the area very, very well, having been involved in economic development for Liverpool. How do you see the kind of skills agenda and the changing ways in which we might provide those skills going forward?
Yeah, I think in terms of, if you think about it, TAFE's a $1.7 billion business statewide with 500,000 enrolments. Western Sydney, that plays out as being 21 facilities and around 20% of those enrolments. So it's a really big sort of important part of skills formation. And at the moment, what TAFE's going through is a really intensive modernisation program, looking at how we deploy our workforce, looking at what our facilities are like, looking at the way we put courses together. So, for instance, just this week we've announced that there's skills points that will be established, which will be a different way of us organising our courses to be able to be responsive to industry needs. So for Western Sydney, that plays out as infrastructure being the headquarters, for that being in Mount Druitt. And in terms of the creation and ideation skills point, that will be based in Parramatta. So they're two very critical industries for Western Sydney that we're recognising. But it's about the way we're looking to train. And I think the one thing that we bring, along with the Western Sydney University, of course, is we're here in this place and we actually can train people in their precincts. So when I talk to the local health districts, they're saying we've got a shortage in terms of medical administration, clinical coding, pathology, and really what we don't have necessarily right at the moment is the training in those places, which makes it easier to have those jobs in those places. So I think that's a very, very important part. We're also we're putting in place a TAFE Digital, which will allow people to access online 24 hours a day, and that's a very important part when people actually are time poor, which they are. And probably the other thing I just want to really stress is in terms of when we look at all this together, the point of difference that we have is when our facilities are actually, top class. So people want to come to your facilities when they know that it mirrors their workplace. So for instance, the models around skills exchange were around adapting to the needs of industry, not just about having, the vet qualification, but actually having the soft skills as well. How do you work in a team? Your mathematics for that industry, your English in terms of that, and actually blending that together so the product at the other end, as far as the businesses were concerned, actually met their needs. So it's not just about saying we're going and embarking on this change. We've actually made some of those changes already with new delivery mechanisms, and we've got to continue to do that in partnership with other groups. Though.
I was going to say, quickly on partnership and collaboration, what's the network or the relationship with the university, with schools? Is that on the move as well in terms of how skills provision works?
Yeah. I think Barney and I have got another discussion about this in a couple of weeks' time, but the bottom line of it is at all of our major campuses, Western Sydney University are there with us. So, basic things in terms of even getting the infrastructure right for both of us on those sites is really critical, but also the articulation between, vet and sort of university degrees and how we actually do that better. And those are things that are certainly on our agenda to talk about.
Can I just add on to that, Tim? I think, and we haven't mentioned it yet on the panel, although Luke touched on this in terms of the schools agenda, primary and secondary schools agenda. The current state government's made commitments to schools in Western Sydney as well, and one of those is to put a STEM selective high school on our campus at Hawkesbury. Yeah. And I think that's another indication of the value of our precincts, including schools developments alongside TAFE universities in proximity to the health precinct. So I think that we particularly while we're beginning to explore new models of delivery of secondary education, in particular vertical high schools and other ideas. These are all, I think, important parts, not just of how we coordinate and cooperate together, but how we deliver precincts, how we get scale, how we actually get efficiency in our infrastructure development, and I think how we can bring some connectivity and pathways vertically across the education system that it would be unique, I think.
I think also it's great that in Western Sydney we're not just seeing a capital program, we're seeing innovation around what the content and this kind of seamlessness that can be with the community. And it struck me, sorry.
I was going to say, the other thing that the scale of the infrastructure spend allows to happen is some serious infrastructure skills legacy development.
Yeah.
And so on all of our programs, and it's certainly something that government's been very focused and we're working with our partners, have actually really taken, I think, to quite a significant level. Westmead, the early works contractors have done a good job, but now we've awarded the ECI to the main works contractor. They're about to establish at Westmead a connectivity and learning centre that will actually bring together a whole range of facilities. TAFE is one of those. It's disability. It's also about the Aboriginal participation, which is on that project going to actually reach 5% of spend. And so, yeah, we are looking about how we take social disadvantage and actually begin to really attract some skills into the infrastructure.
Well, I was going to ask Lindy a people question in a way. It's part of you conservative, like in terms of
it's an important piece that we think is actually rounding that equation out as well. The skills
I was going to say that I wondered how the local community in your area saw this massive growth coming in their area. Do they see it as opportunity? They worry about it? You know, change is often worrying. The people side of the equation of change, how does that work in your area?
Yeah, look, we've had a really interesting experience. I think Greg mentioned it this morning in terms of local government. It's fundamental, it's legislative for us to consult our communities.
Yeah.
So we're just about to put our community strategic plan out on exhibition. And our community told us that they wanted us to be ambitious, innovative and grow. So, yeah, you're always going to have pockets of people that are challenged by the change, but certainly our community, we had an incredible response from the community in terms of actually people wanting to communicate with us, and they're right behind it. They just want innovation. They want a livable city where they don't have to travel for jobs, entertainment, sports, arts. They want it in their city. So I think communities are really actually hungry for the collaboration and hungry for the growth. The one thing I was going to say that I wanted to add, listening to everybody though, when I talk about collaboration, it's not just about the institutions, it's got to be about connectivity. Right. At the moment, the greatest constraint for southwestern Sydney is we can't get to each other. Yeah. It took me 2.5 hours to get here today. 2.5 hours. Now, I can get to the CBD in 1 hour and 10 minutes. Now, there's something wrong with that equation when Western Sydney can't connect to Western Sydney. Yeah. And I think fundamentally, we can talk about our health and education precincts all we like, but economy will not grow if people can't travel easily between areas to have that choice of housing as well as their choice of employment.
I think it's an absolutely brilliant note to which to end that part of the conversation, because without that kind of shrinking of the distance in this place, and
you're
some
not
of
going
our
to let the town planner talk then?
Say again? But
30-minute cities, perhaps?
but it's
No, I'm
but
just
it's a really important question, because you know, it takes me an hour by train to get to Liverpool from the CBD of Sydney. It should take about 20 minutes, and the world changes dramatically as my phone rings in the middle of my speech.
Tim, can I
dramatic if we could do that.
Tim,
I've got time for Michael to say something.
Really important that in terms of, though, one of the things we've got to be careful not to do a disservice about is actually we've got a talent pool in Western Sydney that can bring business to us. And we've got to think about that. Yeah. So it's about connectivity, but it's also we can bring business to us. We've got the talent pool. We're age 34 in Western Sydney on average compared to 38 in New South Wales. That's significant. We've got the talent pool, and we've got to not forget that too.
Okay, now we've got time for a couple of questions from the audience. I will obviously ask questions if people don't ask questions, but I shall be very severe if they don't ask questions. Anybody want to ask a question? I'm going to be very severe. I've got a question. So we've just done a study as a committee for Sydney, which showed that there's a real job pool, actually. There's a labour pool of kind of increasingly graduate people in certain parts of Western Sydney, but the job density is not there. The access to the very point that Lindy was making. So I suppose I'm going to ask Barney a bit about this and the team to finish. I mean, Lindy raises a very good point, right? So you're already, you're doing lots of good things in places. You do need some help. There's some projects coming along. The potential for an orbital rail link connecting Campbelltown round to Penrith. You're all going to be advocates for the kind of infrastructure the city needs to complete your work, I think. Barney, how do you know, it's an important agenda.
It is, and I think we've all been talking about this since the announcement of Western Sydney Airport as a reality, and Paul Fletcher, the Minister, made it clear just recently at a Committee for Sydney function that the government will continue with the airport irrespective, in a sense, of the decision that might be made next week by Sydney Airport Group. So I think we've been talking about how we can make these zones job attractors, but they have to be the knowledge end, the high-tech end of the spectrum. We've, at the university, been talking about the innovation corridor from Campbelltown up through Badgerys, the science park of Celestino that's now beginning to take shape, what we have around Penrith as a cluster with the hospital and the precinct there, and of course up into the northwest. I think we need to convert these ideas, and Westmead's a wonderful example of this because it is truly going to be a job attractor to take advantage of the job, the availability of high quality people in Western Sydney to undertake those jobs. We've got to make the most of our spaces to attract industry and business in.
I think it's not an and, not an or. I think we've got to do both.
Okay,
so I think we've got to do the transport, but we've got to get the housing and the livability around these precincts right.
So 30-second burst from everybody, then we go to our break. Sam, same question. What excites you most about the moment and the opportunity? What excites you most?
There's never been a moment like this, I think, is the answer, and that's the willingness to get stuff done and the momentum that's now been built. I've got to get my Ian Harper quote in here. We've got to be careful we don't build the 21st century horse cemeteries, though. So it's about having enough vision and backing ourselves to actually make sure we get the right infrastructure built.
Hey, Sarah, you're all about the vision, so come on.
Well, Sam's going to put a quote in there. I will, from one of my team members. But, it's very much as the city grows, we've got to think more locally. We've got to think more focused around creating that balance between jobs and between housing. But also, for me, as an urban planner and an economic planner, it always comes back to amenity. Where do people want to live? Where do they want to work and why? And how do we create that environment so people want to stay in the third city or the Western city and don't need to travel out? And how do we create that environment that people want to invest and build their businesses there? And I think that's the absolute game changer for us. I'm just delighted everyone's tracking in the same direction.
Barney.
Look, I think it is, as Sam and Sarah have said, it is a unique moment. I think it's not just a generational moment for Western Sydney. It is a once-in-a-century opportunity to get this right. People have talked about it for far too long, and I do agree it's about the amenity of our cities in Western Sydney. If we don't get that right, people won't be coming to work, to live, we won't attract the industry base, and we won't make the most of this opportunity.
Lindy.
Look, I think it's really critical that all of the amenity and the infrastructure, the education and health comes at the same time as the housing. It's very difficult to retrofit, and I think it's really important to be very holistic in our planning up front. I think the other thing that we're really craving is that new edge out there, new way of doing things, and I think that that's the thing that's really going to be the point of difference for us and for our communities. As you saw with the quantum presentation, we've got a really high-tech community that are craving that innovation. So I think that's really critical.
Michael.
And from my end, we've actually got the projects that allow us to provide the training to get the jobs in places. I don't think we've ever had that, Western Sydney Airport scale of that size, but there are other projects, the intermodal, etc. They're happening at the moment, and we've got to harness that opportunity while we've got that moment.
So I think it's an extraordinary moment, and with the talents and the agreement that we've got around the table, we can't possibly fail. Lindy, I have to tell you, I'm now going to move my family to Campbelltown because I like the idea of somebody being enthusiastic about what we can do with this city, and bugger the rest of it. We'll all move to the southwest. So
you can come and watch the beach volleyball if you like.
I'll do that. More closely than my wife would like, no doubt. But on that note, can I ask you to thank our great panel for today? Thank you.